Good morning. Welcome to the 11th day of April 2018. This is Freeway Bible Study. My name is Kurt Bell. I'm your host. Let's begin. I'm a non-believer. It means I don't abide the supernatural bits in the Bible. Don't believe that there's a God or a heaven or a soul or things like that. But I enjoy the story, and I enjoy reading it and thinking about it and talking about it with as open a mind as I possibly can. Let me just plug something in here real quick before I go. In the event that I'm wrong, right? But so far, what I know of the Bible, if I find out I'm wrong, it's probably not going to cause me to become a believer. I mean, I'll be a believer, but I wouldn't be an adherent. I would reject the God of the Bible based on what I so far know. It's one thing to believe that a tyrant is real, but it's another thing altogether to swear allegiance to that tyrant. So let's go ahead and proceed. And maybe by the time I get this project done, maybe I will have changed my mind. But I don't think so, because I've done this already. I've read the Bible through before. The Genesis 30, this is where we're following the further adventures of Jacob, son of Isaac, son of Abraham. And in this particular chapter, we have two small sub-stories. The first is the story of Jacob's wives, Leah and Sarah. No. Hold on. Leah and I had the same problem yesterday. I couldn't remember her name, and it was I got hung up at the very first. Rachel, that's right. Leah and Rachel. And the second part is the experience between Jacob and his father-in-law and the dividing of the sheep. So let's jump right into it. So at the end of Genesis 29, Genesis 29 was all about Jacob fulfilling his whole entire purpose in coming to this land, which was to find a wife from his mother's family. Because remember, his dad didn't want him to marry any of the Canaanite women. So he arrived and he met Rachel right away, fell in love with her, and signed a contract or basically agreed to a contract with her father, to Laban, to marry Rachel after 7 years of work. When the 7 years were up and he came to claim his prize, he was given Rachel's older sister Leah instead, which is not what he wanted, because apparently she's not nearly as beautiful as Rachel, and he didn't love her after all. So he enters into another 7-year agreement. I mean, Laban, the excuse was given that in that country you shouldn't marry the younger daughter before the older, and then given that Leah was the older daughter, she should go first. So Jacob agrees to that, and he takes Leah to be his wife, and then agrees to another 7 years to get Rachel. So at the end of all that time, and actually at the end of not at the end of 14 years, but it seems like he takes Rachel to be his wife very soon after. I'm still not clear if he had to wait another 7 years before he could go in unto Leah, or if he had to, hold it in all that time. There's some clues that he may have waited longer, because we know that Leah has an older son, old enough to go out into the fields and forage later in the story. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. So what begins now is kind of a baby war. And so at the end of Genesis 29, Leah has 4 sons in rapid succession, because God saw that she was sad, because she knew that her husband loved her more beautiful sister Rachel more than Leah, and so he basically amplified her womb, and he made her very fertile, and she had not just 4 children, but 4 sons in rapid succession, making her, a real success in that day and age. So Rachel, now that she's married to Jacob, and she can't seem to bear any children, she comes up with a scheme, and she takes her maid servant. Now remember, when the girls each marry Jacob, their father Laban gives each of them a slave girl to be their servant. So each of these women, Leah and Rachel, each have a slave girl. So Rachel comes up with an idea. She says, well, if I can't bear a child, maybe my slave girl can. And the slave girls are actually named. And she then she tells her husband, Jacob, go in unto my slave girl, and the child that she bears will be mine. And she says that she'll bear the child on her knees, and which kind of brings to an image of her maybe, because that's what she says. She says, and my slave girl will bear you a child upon my knees. And I try to figure out what does that mean. And I pictured in my mind Rachel laying down on a bed, or maybe sitting on a chair. Excuse me, I gotta sneeze. And with the slave girl, pregnant and heavy with child, about to give birth, sitting on her, resting on her body, such that their legs are spread. I don't mean to be too graphical, but their legs are spread. You get the idea. And it's a symbolically giving birth upon the other woman. And it's like, is that what she means? Do they have like some sort of a ritual by which the baby would be born upon the body of the woman who will adopt it? I don't know. Anyway, that's what it says in the Bible. She says she will have it upon my knees. And that was, of course, we covered this in other chapters. That was a pretty common thing for families to, if they're having trouble conceiving, and particularly conceiving a son, they would enlist the help of a concubine or a slave to do so, and then adopt the child into the family. That's a pretty common practice for the time and place and the people. So that's what she does, and sure enough, the slave girl conceives and bears a son. So good. So we have, if we're keeping a ledger, we have four sons for Leah, one son for Rachel, and she feels pretty good about it. I think she has another son then as well, so maybe two. But I won't get the order right, but what begins is a rapid succession of back and forth births, mostly sons. The next step is that Leah, whose womb has now been closed apparently by God, and it does say in this chapter, it indicates that God's stepping in and doing this. He's actually opening and closing wombs as he sees fit. Her womb is closed, so she decides to do the same thing that her sister did, and she gets her slave girl and gets Jacob to go in unto her, or to make love to her, as is said in the New International Edition, and she conceives and bears a son. And now you got the real, not a trade war, but like I said, but the baby war going on, and bam, bam, back and forth. Babies are being born right and left. Wombs are being opened and closed by God right and left between the two wives and their slaves. And all the while, I just imagine how exhausted poor Jacob must be. Or maybe he's a lucky guy. I mean, wow. I mean, he's got a new adventure every night, right? And it's good to be king. And anyway, so we end up with a account of I don't remember where it happens, but it's somewhere in there. Maybe it's up around 10 babies in, all boys. We get to a point where a strange thing happens, where Rachel's son is out foraging, and he finds some mandrakes I think he finds them among the reeds, and he brings the mandrakes back, and the mandrakes must be really good or something. I don't know how you use a mandrake, but I know, didn't they use that in Harry Potter? Isn't that something wizards and witches use? I don't know. Anyway, so I could hear a witch cackling, and the root of a mandrake, and the dead man's blood. I don't know, maybe from some sort of a spell-like concoction. But anyway, this is Leah's son is the one that brings the mandrake, and Leah is preparing the mandrakes up when Sarah comes to her and says, won't you give me some of those mandrakes? She wants them as well. And Leah comes up with a deal. She says, sure, I'll give you some if you'll let me sleep with our husband tonight. So I guess maybe he hasn't been too fond of going in onto Leah lately, and so she had to kind of, finagle a deal to get that to happen, and you kind of feel for Leah a little bit. I mean, she's it says she's not as beautiful as her sister, and there's something wrong with her eyes, as it says in Genesis 29. You kind of got to feel for her. God clearly feels for her. Thus he opened her womb in Genesis 29 because her husband didn't love her so much, and to attempt to help out. That was kind of nice of God. A curious thing that he intervenes like that. What about the free will thing? But anyway, so she agrees Rachel agrees to take some mandrake in exchange for the bed rights of their husband that night. So Leah is very excited, and she sees her husband coming in from the field. Jacob's coming into the field, and she runs out to him and says, guess what? Guess what? You are mine tonight, because and she literally says it kind of just this way. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I bought you for the night. I mean, it really does come out just like that. And it makes me wonder who wears the pants. I guess it wouldn't be pants. The turban? They're not the turban. The smock. I don't know what it is that they wore back then. Who wears the beard in the house? Because imagine you're coming home from work and one of your two wives comes running out to you and says, I paid for you to be my sex toy tonight. So rest up and save a little bit of energy. So we don't get Jacob's response, but they do the little business that they're going to do, and sure enough, Leah becomes pregnant, and this time I think she has another son. Somewhere in there they're going to throw in a daughter, and we're going to get the daughter's name. Well, I think about all the sons have names too. We're given the names, but the daughter has a name too. So now, by the time we're all done, I think we're up to 12, is it an even dozen sons and one daughter? Or maybe it's 11 sons and one daughter. Leah's definitely, if you tally them up, Leah's got more. I can't remember how many, but a lot more. I think like twice as many sons than Rachel. But Rachel's still got the looks, right? So that's how that all kind of ends. And I was taken by the way that God seemed to be, watching from heaven, the domestic, intrigue of these two women and their slave girls and their husband, their shared husband, and how God would step in, and I could almost see him closing the matrix of the one, making her infertile, and opening the, turbocharging the ovaries of the other, and then back and forth to do this, kind of playing a little bit of a game. And God seems to enjoy doing this. Remember, he did this with Sarah, Abraham's wife, way back in the day. He also did this with Abimelech and all of his wives and all of his slave girls, and he also did this with Pharaoh and all of the women of Pharaoh's women as well. So manipulating the wombs of women seems to be a way that God likes to handle things. There they go, going fast. And here comes another one. So I'll let those guys pass. There we go. I'm going to move over here. And that thus ends that section. Now there's a small section to follow, but an interesting section. The last part of Genesis 30 is that it's going to be time for Jacob to take his wives and his children and his things and his cattle and go. And he and Laban talk about. Remember, Laban is Rachel and Leah's father. So it's his father-in-law, Jacob's father-in-law. He goes to him and says, it's almost time for me to go. I think he says that, but they want to divide up the cattle. And I remember, Laban doesn't want Jacob to leave because he knows that he's enjoying the secondary benefit of God's blessing by virtue of the fact that God loves Jacob. And so Laban's done really well having Jacob around by virtue of having God blessed Jacob, which then kind of, because they're in the same household, has simultaneously blessed Laban. And so Laban has a lot more cattle, a lot more slaves, and everybody knows that's the case. So when Jacob says, "I think I'm going to leave," Laban says, "Don't leave. I know that my good fortune is due to the fact that God loves you, and I'd like you to stay." But I think Jacob makes a pretty good case that he needs to go, and he makes a proposal to divide up the sheep. And what he says is that, "I will take," this is Jacob speaking, "I will take all the speckled, spotted, and striped cattle from the flocks." I think he's particularly talking about sheep. "And you can have all the unblemished ones," which may sound like a good deal, because we know, for example, that God prefers the unblemished animals for his sacrifice, although there hasn't been any talk of sacrifice for quite a while. So we know that that's probably a pretty good deal, but I wonder in terms of numbers, wouldn't the unblemished ones, I don't know anything about cattle or sheep, but wouldn't the unblemished ones maybe be a more a rare animal? And so wouldn't this be giving Jacob the greater numbers? I don't know. But anyway, Laban thinks this is a fine deal, and he agrees to it. And as soon as he's done with the deal, he goes out to the flock and takes all of the speckled, spotted, and striped animals, segregates them away from the others, and gives them to his sons, and then takes off and starts grazing them 3 days away. So basically he agrees that, yeah, I'll give you all the imperfect animals, imperfect being, with a blemish, speckled, spot, or stripe. You can have those, and then he takes them all away, so that when Jacob goes through the flocks, he won't find any. It'll all be perfectly unblemished animals, so there'll be nothing to take. Kind of a sneaky thing to do. Well, Jacob, being the clever guy that he is, and the blessed by the Lord, he comes up with a counter scheme. He recognizes this has happened. He comes up with a counter scheme, and he goes down by the watering hole and grabs some sticks, and he strips the bark off of the sticks such that it reveals the white wood of the interior. And so imagine just that, like I'm sure we've all stripped a stick before. And he places that strategically near the watering hole in one area. And what happens is that he brings the sheep there. These are the unblemished sheep, and to drink. And while they're doing so, they do what sheep do, which is that they mate. So the males are climbing upon the females, and the ones that look at the sticks, that are standing there without the bark, kind of like white stripes, that causes those sheep to. Remember, these are unblemished sheep, non-speckled, striped, or spotted sheep. Causes them to conceive animals that will have stripes, and that then causes the herd to increase. Even though Laban has taken away all of the blemished animals, speckled, striped, and spotted animals, we start seeing more of those animals appearing due to Jacob's little trick. Now this is going to take some time, so it's not like he met with Laban and says, "I'm going to take all the speckled, spotted, striped animals and head out, and I'll see you, have a good life." No, this is taking time, because Laban's got to execute his deceit. Jacob has to implement his counter plan. We have to have enough time for animals to mate, conceive, bear animals, and increase generation after generation, because what happens is we end up with the flock that is a great number of speckled, spotted, and striped animals, and very few spotted animals or unblemished animals. And that's when Jacob, pulls the trigger and says, "Okay, it's time to go." Laban is clearly not happy about this, although he's the dickweed, because he's the one that took the speckled, spotted, striped animals away in the first place, right? So why do these people, that they clearly know that God exists and they know that God favors this other person, why would they execute such deceit? Are they stupid? But anyway, he's not happy, and he's moping around the camp. He's not happy with his son-in-law, who sure, they both performed a trick, but one was a counter trick in response to the deception of Laban, right? So here we go. So now suddenly Jacob is going to be rich and return to Isaac and his family, a wealthy man with 2 wives, 11 or 12 sons and a daughter, and who knows how many others, and maybe a basket full of mandrakes and a partridge in a pear tree. So that's kind of where the chapter ends, and from there we'll go ahead and proceed on to I think in the next chapter we're going to see the actual separation as Isaac then prepares to return, and hopefully by then his brother Esau has calmed down since being tricked out of his blessing, whatever the heck the blessing is, back in the day. Thanks for joining me again for another Freeway Bible study. I did pose a couple of questions on Facebook from this chapter, 2 of them. One of them was regarding the God's stepping in and intervening with opening and closing the wombs, and I asked, is this how God operates? Does this demonstrate the effectiveness of prayer? And is God still doing the same thing today? And the example I used was when 2 football coaches on either sides of other teams pray for victory, and then does God step in and instead of opening and closing wounds, but he touches the football or holds back the arm of the quarterback, or nudges it forward to push the ball a little further? Is that still going on? Does that make any sense? And the second question was that if I was just more of a point, if I were to die today and find myself at the pearly gates and St. Peter says, well, you're clearly a sinner, heathen, blasphemer, and a despicable atheist, time for you to go to hell. But just before he pushes the button, he says, do you have any last words? I would say, yeah, Genesis 30. How could you possibly expect me to believe any of that? Whoa, is this on fire? Oh no, that's just dirt. Whew, good. How could you expect me to believe any of this story after reading what I read in Genesis 30 about the process of reproduction by virtue of laying out sticks? And doesn't that kind of, I mean, what the heck? Is that all clearly? Well, then what I mean by that is clearly that's demonstrating a superstitious. God is allowing, if God was really the author of this book, he is allowing a clearly a superstitious belief to be captured and pushed down the generations and centuries through his book to be later examined by people, namely us, who would recognize that as nonsense. That's not how you don't create speckled, spotted, and striped sheep by stripping the bark off of branches and sticking them in the mud by the water so that the sheep look at them while they're mating. We know that's not how that works. Genetics is at play, and mutation also has its role. There's nothing to do with sticks. So why would a God allow that, and that people like us would read that, and then to think that we would still trust that this book isn't anything other than a man-made story? And then St. Peter would pull the lever, say, well, the hell with you, literally, and off I'd go. And I'd go there, and I like to keep saying this, I'd go there comforted by that, even though I'm going to suffer in pain for the rest of my day, for all eternity, at least I'll be comforted by the warm glow of having abided my principles and maintaining the soundness of my worldview based on reason and common sense, and didn't just give in to belief on the basis of fear, and setting aside my better reasoning skills. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a great day. Make it a good life.